Hey, how's it going? Keith Morgan here for TechDyro.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to do our final product render for our fake game here. So here we have our DVD case, and in the last part we also made our DVD disc. So we're going to go ahead and merge these two files and put it together. So off the bat here, we're just going to go up to File and Append, and this is if you modeled your disc in a separate blend file. If you made it in the same one, just ignore this part. So we'll go ahead, find our object here, and you can see we have our disc here in the scene too, and it's brought in with all the right materials. And I'm just going to hide the disc for now. We're going to make a bit of a lighting setup for our scene here, and so I'm just going to go ahead and rotate, or rather I'm going to tab into edit mode and find our the back of our case here, and I'm just going to select a few faces here. Doesn't really matter, just so long as you have at least one. I guess the center one works. Hit Shift S and then cursor to selected, and that'll put the 3D cursor right at that face point. If we tab out into object mode and we choose origin to 3D cursor, it'll put the origin at the base, or on that back face rather. So now when we rotate, it'll rotate around that point. So when we want to rotate it and put it on the floor, we can just rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis, and now it's sitting there. And, or rather we'll rotate it -90. There we are. So now it's sitting flush on the ground plane there. So we have our one case there. And what we're going to do to make a stack of them is we're just going to go over here to the modifier panel and choose an array modifier. And so what you can see is that made a double of it, and that'll put it in the direction that we set here on the relative offset. If we the first one is the relative x, y, and z axis. We're going to put the x to 0, and we're going to increase the z offset to 1. Sorry, the y to 1. There we are. You can see I put it below it, so we'll set that to -1. There we are, so put it on top. And now we can just put up the count, so we get a few here. And we'll just go into our material view so we can make sure these are facing the right way. Yep, cool. You know, make as many as you want. So you have that. And what you can do then is we'll go to rendered view. We'll just see how these are looking on top of each other. Yeah, quite nice. If you wanted to add a little bit of randomness to this, you could go ahead and apply it and just very slightly offset each of them so that they're not all the same. But you know, for a product render, generally they're going to look a little bit more perfect than not. So we'll leave this stack perfect as this. We're also going to duplicate our case again. We'll delete the array modifier. We'll hit Alt-R to clear the rotation and bring it back to the starting position we had. And we'll just, this time, hit ZZ, go to solid view. We'll grab the faces on the bottom here. Just the ones that sit flat and that aren't curving around too much. We'll hit Shift S again, cursor to selected, tab out, change the origin to the 3D cursor, and that'll put the origin right on the bottom. So when we hit Alt G to clear the location, you can see that it resets it right to the bottom point there, so now it's resting on the floor. And then if we move it with G and then Shift Z so that it excludes the Z axis, we can move it right on the floor as well. And then we can just rotate it, and we'll lean it up against our case here. You know, whatever you feel like. And if you want your art to show through a bit more for those ones on the stack, just move it off to the side there, and we can see what that looks like. Pretty nice. Alright, so now we'll get this disc working here. We'll unhide it with Alt-H, and that'll bring it back. So we'll just move it so we can see it. And what we're going to do here, if we just come to the right view, we're going to duck it behind peeking out behind this side of the case. Similar to some DVD commercials you'd see, they'd have the discs sticking out of the side of the case, just so you would see them there. But I like to work with everything facing the front, so I'm just going to grab everything here and rotate it on the Z by 90 degrees, so everything's facing. And then we'll grab our discs. And in the last tutorial, we made these, double check, if you made these with the original instructions I gave you, these would be twice as big, so you just want to scale them by 0.5 if they're this big compared to your case there. So if they're that big compared to your case, just scale it by 0.5 and you'll have the proper dimensions. So yes, so we'll just clear the rotation on that. We'll rotate it on the X by 90, so that's vertical. And if we just go to orthographic, we can see things a bit better. We're gonna take this case object. We'll just go over here to the property panel and see what its rotation is. Currently it's 13.5 degrees on the Z-axis. So we will do the same for the disc. 13.5, just so it's more or less parallel. And we'll duck it behind there. And see what that looks like. Okay. So if you want the art to show up, or rather so you can see the actual title of the disc, or the game on the disc, you can just rotate it on the Y, or sorry, the local Z axis. Yeah. So if you hit ZZ twice, it'll rotate it on the local Z, which because we rotated it at perfect 90-degree angles to get this angle, is still technically just rotating it on the Y-axis, the global Y-axis. So yeah, you can do either or. So we'll just have that. And then to show off the actual disc material, like the backside that we made, we'll go ahead and duplicate the disc. We'll move it up on the Z-axis just a bit. And then we'll move it back on the Y-axis. And then we'll rotate it Z 180, just so we get to see the back of it. And we'll maybe move it up a bit more, just so you can see the whole there. And let's see what that looks like. Ah, pretty good. All right, so now to actually make a cyclorama and lighting scheme for this, we're going to delete the sun lamp we have here, just so we can start fresh. We're going to keep, if you haven't already, we have an environment map applied, and if you want to see what that looks like quick, turn off transparent, go back to rendered, perspective, yeah, so you can see we have this environment map, and that'll just give some nice variation to the reflections, but we won't actually be using too much of it, otherwise you'll start seeing buildings in your discs, and then it'll be confusing because the discs aren't near buildings. You know, if you're worrying about that. So anyways, we're going to go ahead, hit Shift S, and then cursor to center to reset our 3D cursor there. We're going to add a plane, and then this will just give us a surface to a nice little area that we'll have to worry about as opposed to entire space that we see, and it'll also give us a place for shadows to be cast onto, and potentially reflections if we want to go that way. But I'm just going to come in here to the side, and in edit mode, I'm just going to grab this back edge, and we're going to extrude it up a few times, and maybe add a loop cut there and a loop cut there, just so we can get a nice curve, and it doesn't have to be too curvy, just enough. And then if we turn on smooth shading, and if we take the outside perimeter, give it a mean crease of 1, and then apply a subsurf modifier with 1 division, that'll smooth it out. And yeah, we can go ahead and maybe tweak some of these just so it's a bit smoother, something like that. Okay, so that'll just give this a nice infinity wall effect, so your scene will just kind of fade off into infinity as an illusion. But then this material, we'll give it a, if we go to the node editor and give it a material, we'll call this backdrop. We'll give it a ambient occlusion material. And what's nice about ambient occlusion materials is that they're really, really easy to render because they're just rendering the flat color, and then it just adds the shadows on top where it needs to be added. So, you know, you get to keep dumping lights into the scene and it won't change the luminosity of the actual backplane, but you'll get these nice shadows below it. So yeah, we'll just give it, make it some sort of color in the, just so we can differentiate it here. And let's go to rendered, and we'll see what we like. So you can see even just with white, we get these nice shadows going on here. I'm just going to go ahead and take our disc here, go to the front view. We'll just move it so that it's sitting on the ground plane, so that it doesn't look like it's floating. We'll just move that one so it's down a bit more. And we'll go back to rendered, and we'll see what that looks like. So yeah, you can see the disc is now doesn't look like it's floating as much. So we get this nice effect. But if we want to color cyclorama here, we can go ahead and change the color of the ambient occlusion node rather. So let's see what we can find, if anything. Actually, you know what? White probably is good. You can always you know, tweak it from there if you want. If you notice when we were changing the color here, the reflection on the actual objects here was changing color as well. If you don't want it to show up in the reflections of this, you can go ahead and go to the Object tab, go under Ray Visibility, and turn off Glossy, and it'll stop showing up in the actual reflections of the objects in your scene. So then we can go ahead and color it a little bit more. Like you can see, it still makes an effect on the diffuse, but in terms of glossy, it doesn't make so much of an impact. And actually, if we turn off diffuse, we should, yeah, be able to get away from that in general, or entirely. So you can have any color you want, and it won't make an effect. All it's there for is to catch the ambient occlusion of the objects in your scene. So like I said, we can give it any color now because it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and choose, yeah, something like a dark purple like that, just so it complements the orange in the scene well. So we're just going to make it a little bit more fancier of a material. So I'm going to go ahead and add two mix shaders, one between the ambient occlusion and the output, and another one behind it. And in this one, we're going to feed that into the bottom of the mix shader for the ambient occlusion. And we're going to mix a diffuse node and a glossy node. And what the diffuse will do is pick up some of the shadows cast by the objects in the scene, just a little bit. And then the glossy will pick up a small amount of reflection, as you can see right there we're getting. If we leave the roughness really high, it should be a little bit more friendly to us as well. For the diffuse color, I'm just going to go ahead and copy the material, or sorry, the color of the our backdrop here. And let's see. I'm just going to go ahead and make it less glossy here, and we'll mix in a little bit less of it. Yeah, you just play around till you get a nice balance that you like. If you want your reflections to be a little bit sharper, turn down the roughness on the glossy shader there. There we go. So that's starting to look pretty good. So now we're going to move our camera into place. So we'll just go and hit 0 to go into our camera view. If we turn on lock camera to view, we can go ahead and move this manually, and we can frame this up nice. So what's nice is that the case bisects the third lines here, and we got these nice lines that draw your eye across. But let's see if we can, something like that. We can even reduce the size of this camera a bit if we wanted to. If we make the Y like 1200, it'll make it a bit shorter compared to its height, and we can frame it a bit better. So let's look at what that looks like. Something like that. Okay, so I'll just come over here, and we're just gonna rotate this cyclorama here to be in line with the camera. So you can see here that we've rotated it -6 degrees, I guess, on the z-axis. So we'll just rotate it, or I guess 6 degrees on the z-axis. So let's type in 6z. and yeah, it's more or less parallel. And let's go back and look at how that looks now. Okay, yeah, that's a bit better. So what we can also do here now is start adding some lights into the scene. So we're going to go ahead and recreate our sun lamp, and we're going to move it up just so we can differentiate it from the scene. It doesn't matter where the sun lamp is, all that matters on the direction of the ray it's shooting out. But this will be our key light, so we'll have it facing the front, kind of like that. And rotate it on the Z just to, kind of get it striking on this side here, and it'll pick up the highlights on the side here. If we go to the sun options, we can turn its size down to 1 centimeter or so. Sorry, 1 centimeter, not 1 meter. And let's see what that looks like. So you can see that's picking up on the cyclorama there. So we could even just turn down some of the glossy, or something. Put a little bit less in. Okay. Go back to our sun, and if we check our strength up to 20, that's much too much. Maybe 10, 5. Yeah, 5 looks alright. And we'll leave the color at white. White, yep. So I'm just going to frame this a little bit different. Yeah, okay, something like that. Okay, and I actually might rotate. Yeah, if we rotate our cyclorama, we can get rid of that specular highlight that we have there in the background, just from getting in our way. Maybe bring back a little bit of the glossy, take off the hue. There we are. Okay, so let's see what else we can do here. We'll add a point lamp. And if we just see what we're doing, if we put it kind of over here by that disc, and we make the size 1 centimeter as well, we should be able to kind of paint how that reflection's going to look. And we'll just put the strength from 100 down to 1, and even that looks a bit strong, so we'll just move it off. And you get something like that. Maybe 0.5 on the strength. We just needed enough to make that specular refraction there. 0.2, yeah, okay, something like that. And actually, if we take it and duplicate it with Shift D and move it up on the Z, we can make another one right there. But you'll start running into the issue of you might start getting too much highlight here on the metal surface there, so it's all a game on how much you want to add. You can always just turn down the strength of the point lamps if it starts getting too much. So like, even 0.05, just enough to bring out those highlights. And then it'll cut down on the specularity on the side of the disc there. And then we'll just finally add one more box lamp right in front to illuminate the texture we have here. So we'll just come out here, we'll add a plane. We'll move it up, scale it down, and scale it on the x-axis maybe. And we'll move it into place. And just do something like that, I suppose. So we'll go to rendered now, and we'll give it a material of emission. Emission. Give it white light, a little bit more strength, maybe like 3, just enough to make the colors really pop. All right, so that looks like a pretty good composition. So we'll go ahead and just make sure our settings are all right. So transparent doesn't really matter at this point since we have this background. Performance 256 for CPU, or for GPU rather. Yeah, so we'll just hit F12 and see what we get. All right, so you can see that this is what our final image looks like. You can see we're still getting a little bit of noise here where the two cases are meeting, so you could always put up your render settings Maybe reduce the amount of glossy bounces in the render passes here, just so that it doesn't bounce around and create all this noise. But we're going to go ahead and composite this a very little bit amount. So here at the top where it says default, we're going to switch it over to compositing. And so this will let us actually do some post work on our image. So if we click use nodes, it'll bring up our render layer and our composite node, which is just what it feeds out, what it processes out, and what you can export after. And if we just go over here to our UV image editor and change it to render result, that'll be what ends up in the composite. If we hit Control Shift and click on our render layer, we get a viewer node as well. And if we click under backdrop, we can get a backdrop of what the viewer node sees. To zoom out the background, you just hit V, and if you want to zoom in, it's Alt V. So we're just going to zoom it out so we can see what we're doing. If you want to pan it, hold Alt and middle mouse button, and you can just pan it to your will. But we're going to go ahead and just composite this a very slight amount just to finish off the image. So we're going to go ahead and add a distortion, lens distortion, and we'll feed our original image in. And if we hit Control Shift and click on that node, you can see what goes on in the background. But if we put our distortion up to 1, you can see we get this oval. But all we're going to do is use that to create a matte of sorts for a vignette. So from this point, we go ahead and choose a converter math node, drop that on top. And for the function, we'll use greater than, and for the value, we'll use 0. So you can see that everything that has information, i.e. is greater than 0, is white, and everything that is absolutely empty is black. So now we can use this for a vignette. So we'll go ahead and choose filter, blur, put that on top. We'll change the blur type from Gaussian to fast Gaussian. Relative Y 20 and 20%, something. You can blur it more if you want a less intense vignette. And then we'll go ahead and composite this on top of our original image. So we'll go to color, mix node, drop that on top of our, after our blur node, feed the vignette into the bottom, feed our original image into the top, image inlet, and then we'll change the mode from mix to multiply. And you can see we get this vignette around the outside. And if you don't want that so intense, you could also use soft light. It's usually good. Soft light has the effect of sometimes increasing the saturation if you don't want it to be. So that's where you might want multiply. And you can just factor it down a bit. And so you get something like that. And we'll just color correct this very slightly too. I'm just going to hit Alt-V to zoom in again, just so we can see what we're doing. And move our composite node over. Sorry, probably can't see a lot of this. So we have our lens distortion, or sorry, our original image feeding into a lens distortion. Actually, we can just go through these. So our lens distortion makes the oval here. When we add the converter math node and choose greater than 0 on that, you can see we get this effect. If we blur out that, we get this result, and then we mix that with the original image, we get this result. So that's a quick little tip for making a vignette. I don't think you actually need to feed the original image into the lens distortion. It's just something you can do if you want. It'll work either way. But we'll go ahead and add a color balance. Drop that on top. And so what this will let you do is affect the color in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. Generally, when you color grade things, you want to have them spread out to be complementary. So we'll go ahead and maybe make the shadows a little bit more purple, and then the highlights a little bit more orange, which is similar to what the image is. If you wanted to go for a different effect, green and magenta if you wanted, and even that adds kind of a nice effect. It turns the purple into more of a blue, but you can play around with that if you want. And you can always mix in less if you don't want, like if you want those colors but not so much of those colors, you just put the factor down and get something a little bit closer to what you want. Yeah, something like that maybe. If we just go back between the soft light and the color balance, you can see it's not that much of an effect, but it's enough to make a difference. Let's put the factor down a bit more just so it's not so intense. And if you guys wanted some lens flares for whatever reason, You could go ahead and add a filter glare node. Put that on top. And if we change it to streaks, maximum iterations, put the mix up to 1, you can see just what the lens flares will be. If we put our threshold up to like a 1.1, we'll get even less. It'll use just more of the hotspots for the lens flares. And so you can see especially where we're getting all that bright noise in the crease of the case, we're getting them. And if we put the fade up a little bit, they'll be a little bit longer. But then what we can do is we'll go ahead and add a color mix node, feed the glare into the bottom, feed our original image into the top, and set the transfer mode to add. And you'll see we get a little bit of a glow on those. If you wanted them to be a little bit more standoutish, you could even add a blur after the glare, just so that those lens flares get blurred out a bit. So you can just fast Gaussian relative Y, 0.5, 0.5. That might even be a little bit too much. Whoop, 0.5. Stop. So something like that. And you can see it just blurs it out a bit more, so you get a bit more of a spread out bloom effect as opposed to a hard streak. It's a really subtle effect, but it adds something where it is needed. So we'll say that is looking pretty well done. You can always export this, put text on it, whatever you want. Just the important thing to remember is that when you're done compositing, you feed the final image into the image of the composite node, and you'll see down here after it updates that it'll end up compositing in our UV image editor. And if you render out anything in this project in the future, it will apply this compositing work on top of it. But yeah, so if you want to save this out now, you can go Image, Save as Image, and choose whatever you want. We're just going to go ahead, do that. Call this case export or something, whatever you feel like doing, and save it out. And you can see here we have our final image here, ready for you to use for whatever applications you choose. So I hope you learned a lot in this series, and you feel confident making your own game renders, or case advertisements rather, and you're able to utilize some of the tips and tricks we taught in these 3 episodes. So for final words, this is Keith Morgan for Tech Tyro, signing off.